Our next panel discussion for the day, which is the last one for the day, is termed Beyond Aesthetics and Borders. It is my pleasure to introduce to everybody the panelists for this panel discussion. The first panelist being Arrti Kawlra. Arrti Kawlra has been the academic director of the Humanities Across Border program since 2016. She has worked with Humanities Across Border partners to develop spaces for trans-sectorial academia society exchanges around the themes of place, practice, food, and stories using situated learning methodologies at AASS experimental schools, practice-based workshops, and consultative roundtable meetings. Arrti is also affiliated to the Madras Institute of Development Studies, Chennai, where she is collaborating on a book project with a historian on the politics of craft-based manual training in colonial South India. Her book, We Who Wove with Lotus Thread, Summoning Community in South India, published by Orient Black Swan in 2018, uses the methods of anthropology, social history, and cultural studies to interrogate colonial and post-colonial framings of culture, heritage, and development as they collide with artisanal self-representation in South India. Our next panelist is SWARNAVEL Eswaran. SWARNAVEL Eswaran Pillai is a distinguished filmmaker, film historian, and academic specializing in Tamil cinema and documentaries. He is an associate professor at Michigan State University, teaching in the Department of English and the Department of Media and Information. His work bridges the gap between practice and scholarship, offering a deep and nuanced understanding of Indian cinema's aesthetic, culture, and historical dimensions. As a filmmaker, he has directed several acclaimed documentaries, including Unfinished Journey, which explores the theme of displacement, identity, social political issues. He is also a leading scholar of Tamil cinema. Our last panelist is Kanak Mani Dixit. Kanak Mani Dixit is a distinguished Nepali journalist, writer, and civil rights activist, widely recognized for his contributions to media, literature, and social advocacy in South Asia. He is the founder of Himal Southasian and groundbreaking regional publication that champions cross-border dialogue and fosters a nuanced understanding of South Asian issues. Under his leadership, the magazine became a vital platform for critical journalism and cultural exchange in the region. A staunch advocate for democracy and human rights, Mr. Dixit has been at the forefront of movements promoting press freedom and civil liberties in Nepal. In addition to his journalistic achievements, Mr. Dixit is also an accomplished writer of fiction and non-fiction. Please welcome the panelists. Thank you.
Less than 2 minutes. Hi, my name is Kanak Mani Dixit. This is a video that will illustrate my presentation during the panel, but because the seating is up here, we had to show it before the panel begins. So this is footage I took less than a year ago, crossing over from Atari into Wagah in the India-Pakistan border. And this is meant to illuminate what I have to say about beyond aesthetics and borders. So you'll have to wait for what I have to say about this video, but please bear with me. Let's show the video. Passport. Thank you, Ji. नहीं पोस्ट है ना दूसरे आदमी आ रहा है पासपोर्ट चलो जी लीजिए नेपाल
Good evening, everyone. I'm afraid I'm the most academic of the three, so I'm having to start with a little bit of a very short clip to tell you what I do, just to put it in context. I want to thank Dakshinachitra and Anita in particular for this very interesting panel that she's put together. And in a way that I have not met Kanak before, I have not met SWARNAVEL before, and I'm hoping that through our conversations we will learn more about each other. So thank you for the connection and the conversation, Anita. So I'm just going to give you a little bit about how I see higher education moving with the humanities and social sciences, more really the humanities. And I take the example of a global commodity that I've been following as an anthropologist and a sociologist, indigo. So I've been doing a little bit of secondary research, but also field research. And I want to give you an idea how a commodity which is really in the realm of aesthetics, indigo, has a capacity of crossing borders of all kinds. So I've been working on a project which has been funded for the last 8 years now to make some changes in higher education. And our idea is that we learn from where we are, who we are, what we have, and how we know. Rather than something far away, we're looking at learning in situ and what is near us. So I won't go into too much details, but we have a learning in context, community-based collaborative projects. And when we look at indigo, we look at the plant, we look at the dye, we look at the cake, we look at its botanicals, we look at where it moves in history across regions, the Atlantic, the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean world. But what about the lived experience of the plant and the dye? And how do we connect these vastly diverse spatial and temporal contexts to our present? And also the past. Here's one example of this connection, which is a very aesthetic example. There was a collaboration between an international textile designer and a local artisan from South India, from Andhra Pradesh, Srikalahasti. And they produced together, the designer came, it was designed for Hermes in Italy. And it was later donated, this project was donated to the Mulhouse Museum in France. But the idea was that here's this French designer who's coming to India and working with this artisan in Srikalahasti to do a collaborative project. If you take one look at this, I mean, if you look at it with a deeper lens, you'll see, we see what the designer or the artist is wanting to convey here. And what is the story being told here? So you can see there's, at the bottom, there's Buddha, and at the end of that line, there is a Victorian woman in a dress. So yeah, I mean, I'll let you, I won't make a judgment on what this is, but I'd like you to see what kind of collaborations, what this means. And again, here's another instance of aesthetics, of the use of a commercial commodity like indigo, in the narrative of sustainability, sustainable fashion. And we know that it's, you're looking for wage equity, we're looking for ethical fashion. And here's another, again, as I said, I'm looking at academic research on the indigo, and you can see these two different maps. One is the distribution of indigo, the actual distribution of the plant on the right, and on the left is a map taken from a historian's book on the circulation and trade of indigo. And it's very clear if you see, Africa, it looks like Africa doesn't exist in terms of trade. So So these are some interesting gaps that I'm just pointing out in scholarship with regard to indigo. So my question is, and within higher education, we're trying to ask these questions, that can we imagine a counter map that does not begin or end with Europe as the impetus for the global demand and production of indigo? And how can we go past this knowledge impasse that we have inherited? So in Humanities Across Borders, my colleagues who are in Africa, in different parts of Africa, in Southeast Asia, in South Asia, also in Europe and Mexico, we've been discussing this at length, and we feel that narrativizing and having a humanist approach is something that's missing in higher education. And we need to start focusing on the practice and practitioners of indigo in order to be able to say something more than just beyond the Eurocentric approaches. So I just wanted to just share with you some visuals of how this humanist approach will be able to help us to expand our perspectives. So this is just very close by, not far from here. So what I want to show is that indigo makes visible many different actors if you start looking at the practice of indigo and the possibility of bridging conversations and disciplinary knowledge, which I hope that we will do when we have a conversation with Kanak and Swarnavel. And the idea that it's not just the dye, but it's also the ecological context in which the dye occurs and is extracted and is used. And here I take the example of Southeast Asia, where a single river passing by multiple countries will allow you to have multiple communities of indigo practice. Just because you expand your thinking beyond nation state, you see that the river is implicated in indigo. And so here the same thing we did with our research in indigo outside of Pondicherry in Tindivanam, is that we started looking at the ecology of where these indigo was cultivated. And so basically this is what I want to say, that the idea of looking at something from its practice perspective, from the point of view of its experience, that is important in understanding aesthetics beyond borders. So thank you, and then we go back to our conversation. So I was just wondering that we've already had a small conversation with each other. We are meeting for the first time. And we thought that the provocation that Kanak, you provided us about borders, would you like to say a few words about it?
Sure. I thought I liked the title given to the session, Beyond Aesthetics and Borders, because the idea in the end is to try to uplift the lives of nearly 2 billion people. We fail to understand the scale of problems in South Asia because we're divided by various factors, including the nation states. So we forget that we're all messed up. And the livelihoods, individual livelihoods of individual citizens, if you count them, and to count them up to last week when I did my last count, it was 1.9 billion, 400 million plus. So before we know it, it's going to be 2 billion. And India itself is the largest country in the world by now, by population. So if we want to lift so many people's lives out of, forget about spiritual quest, even material situation, material well-being, then you have to do something about it. And one way to do it is through the nation states, but that's not the only way to do it. And this is where I come into this topic of beyond aesthetics and borders, that we have to have aesthetics that in the end are able to make a mark, to improve lives, frankly. So going back to earlier conversation, that we, in this hall with Shabnam Virmani, I was telling her afterwards that it's Kabir versus the algorithm now. All that Kabir represents and all that Mahakumbha, chaperoned by Yogi Adityanath, represents. These are diverging, and who's getting the upper hand? We always believe that the ideas of Kabir and his ilk, from the Bauls to the Sufis of Multan, you thought that under the surface, they are the ones who control the narrative, even though nation states might be run by more dictatorial or authoritarian individuals and clans and deep states. You believe that there was an undercurrent throughout South Asia. I think that undercurrent, at least for the northern half of South Asia, has changed. And at a mass level, you got the algorithm ruling us and negativism coming ahead. So, will aesthetics work? Will the aesthetics represented by the poetry and the lines of Kabir help us? It seems that to me the technology has run away from us. And so, ultimately, the end goal of improving lives, even materially, is not going to happen. Because when you have such social divides, you can forget about social and of economic advance. So, coming from that angle, I believe that talking about aesthetics and borders, and beyond aesthetics and beyond borders, one is my colleague Anohita yesterday showed a map that some of you may have remembered if you were here in the hall. And that is, as she may have told you, it's not the upside down map of South Asia. It is the quote-unquote right side up map of South Asia. There's a lot of issues of aesthetics within that, because we are programmed to think of North as top of page. But then in the globe, as the globe swims in the ether, as the earth hangs out in space, who's to say that up is north? But then the aesthetics of what a map is supposed to look like is so strong, the negative aesthetics, that that map is intensely disliked, in particular by the power centers and intellectual community in New Delhi. A month ago, that map being carried by hand by an American scholar going back to 2 months ago, going back to the US via Bombay airport, that map was seized by Bombay Customs. So, I believe that we are probably being programmed to understand a kind of aesthetics through cartography that certainly doesn't help us either. Finally, to this map and to the borders. The video that I just showed and the borders. If you fly, and Anohita has heard me say this a few times already, if you're flying east at night from anywhere to the west of South Asia, and you're flying at 35,000 feet, and you come over Lahore, and if you look down, and particularly if you look to the right of the plane, where you look towards the Thar Desert, then you'll see a line in the darkness that goes right to the horizon. And it's like a pearl of necklaces, a necklace of pearls. So aesthetically, extremely pretty and pleasing in the darkness at 35,000 feet. But that aesthetically pleasing sight tells you of the devastation of partition. The fact that essentially all over South Asia, a people who should have soft borders within yourselves are forced into harsh borders with concertina wire, guard dogs, pillboxes, and halogen lamps. And it is those halogen lamps that you see flying over Lahore. A month ago, flying to the US, I saw the same lights again. Most people look down, and this time it was near Karachi. And so you actually see only the line, you don't even see cities. But for people who don't know, that's just a pretty sight as you pass by overhead. Now to this video, and I'll end. Sorry, took more time than I thought I should. This is the video showing the departure from Indian territory, Atari, into Pakistani territory, Wagah. And you have seen the superstructure, the amphitheater on both sides. So talking about, again, about aesthetics. People can have their own points of view, and I don't grudge anybody having a point of view different than mine, but one of the most troublesome acts in South Asia over the last decades have been the beating the retreat ceremony at Wagah Atari, both sides. And both sides, India and Pakistan, the Rangers on the Pakistani side and the border security force on the Indian side, both collaborate in putting up this, for me, awful show of macho nationalism, high-stepping soldiers, mock anger and mock aggression at each other, chest pulled out, and high-stepping, as I said, stomping boots on the ground. That is the one side, and you got cheering going on, people on the auditorium-like setting on both sides, and a 400-foot mast for a flag on the Indian side. And then I go over to the Pakistani side. There has been such incredible collaboration between India and Pakistan, identical 400-foot masts on both sides. So if you want to see full collaboration, you go to Wagah Atari. If you want to see peace, you go to Wagah Atari. Then when you cross over, just before I took this video, you go through what is essentially what is made to look like an airline terminal for customs, immigration, and then to the border, and the similar situation on the other side. But most of the counters are empty. And if you go there, you have to knock and wait for the guy to come because he's going to have chai. It's the silence of a cemetery, but a very welcoming silence. However, now this is where I'll bring in the point of aesthetics. The borders of South Asia should be a cacophony. It should have the grime and the dirt and the noise of a bazaar. That is the true aesthetics if you want to have a crossing point from one territory to another, and commerce should be meeting there. And noise and grime, as I said. For this, you have to go to see the proper aesthetics of a South Asian border point, you have to go to Raxol, Birganj in Nepal. Or you got to go to Bhairava, Sunauli in Nepal, because that is the only open border of South Asia. You will not find it in Petropol, in the Bangladesh border, or Wagah Atari. So let me end with a plea that we need some dirt and grime at our border points if we really want to have aesthetics serving our border crossings of South Asia. Thank you.
So thank you, Kanak. Thank you, Arrti. So thank you, Dakshinachitra, for inviting me here. Let me briefly respond to Kanak and Arrti. That is, Arrti's presentation on the indigo, craftspeople reminded me of, how great filmmakers in cinema engage with craft. That is particularly artisans. Here we have Ramani, who made this excellent film on Tolpave Kuthu, artisans. His film, like legendary Mani Kaul's Marty Manas or Chitrakati, it looks to see if the form itself could be the content. So there, the aesthetics and politics do not have any separation or divide. That is, for instance, in cinema, we can, particularly to talk about Mani Kaul, because he was also our teacher. So constantly he used to talk about how through form we should not easily accept the Western idea of, the Renaissance idea of perspective. Drawing from the great Indian tradition of paintings, that he was invested in the scroll painting, that. Also for content, similarly, he drew on the epic form, where you are not invested in closure. It's more about a story which you already know, but the idea is not the what part of it, but how it is told. So constantly you can see that, craft has been central to his work, like Nomad Puppeteers, that work. So through craft and aesthetics, he was also underlining the contemporary politics, of erasure, of not only the language of the artisans, but of the legacy of certain kind of art which had its locus in villages. Then to address Kanak's border crossings, I agree with largely with what you say, but also that these borders and papers have become more important in our era than human beings. So which is a tragic kind of situation actually. That your social security number or other number is now more important. But also, that all these borders are also predicated on language. Being a lang festival, I wanted to invoke, language. So if you look at, the iconic Gatak for us, Ritvi Gatak, his films are always about partition and borders. But what was the bridge over the troubled waters was the language of Bengali itself. So that again, will refuse to go away. So that way, aesthetics will always be there when we talk about language, how it is spoken. For example, Wittgenstein talks about language as a game. So that is also one way to look at experimental filmmakers, that including Mani Kaul's work, that how form on the one hand, when they talk about it. Like Bresson, there is always the gravitas of contingency or accident. But then there is also the fun part of it, the game part of it. What do you explore? How things fall into place, like in the work of Mayder and so to come back to what we were talking that regarding craft or regarding borders, I think language is also very central, to both of these. And here we also have. One of my teachers, Hariharan, he made a film called Dubarshi, which is predicated on this young boy who translates Ramayana when it is telecast in Hindi to a Tamil audience in Tanjavur, because he knows two bhashas, Dubarshi. So there again you can see that, that how border crossing is not just limited to these big borders. There is also this micro-level border crossing, which is, constantly there, ubiquitous in the lived reality of our life. So I would like to briefly end here. Maybe in our discussion, I will bring these points back.
I mean, I cannot go into the academic depth that you went, Eswaran, but I'm thinking, firstly, yes, there are borders, even physical borders, all around us. Even from a mohalla to another mohalla. But the most consequential border for now seems to be not even between the states of India or the provinces of Pakistan as the two larger countries, but the national borders. Because those national borders becoming ever more rigid to the extent that people on the two sides don't remember the histories. Now that the partition generation has gone, the fact that you're keeping it as a very rigid and blocked frontier does not allow the kind of economic rationalization, if you will, that we need. And so that's why I felt it was important to focus on the national borders. But talking about language and borders, Bangla is spoken on both sides of at least the East Bengal Bangladesh frontier. Yet the border comes up for other reasons. And I'm just reading Manan Ahmed right now about, the book is about Lahore. And somewhere aesthetics seeps in here, I'm sure. And I'm just mentioning this because I'm so interested in the topic. Lahore used to be a city of Punjabi, Persian, Hindi or Hindavi, Hindi mostly, and Urdu. But then after the Pakistani state came on strong, 47, then it was Urdu that was. So it's so poignant what he talks about, all the Hindi inscriptions on doorways, in mohallas, in signposts or nameplates. All of them, some of them still survive decades later. And so I think something is lost, a lot is lost in that journey. But frankly, I don't know where all this fits into the topic. So I apologize and give you the mic.
I just want to reiterate that somewhere when we kind of we forget that the borders are in our everyday. So
the mic is
Hold it closer.
I'm too close or not too close?
Hold it closer.
Closer? Okay. Yeah, so I just want to ask that, we have the borders in our everyday life, in the classroom, with disciplines, where the classroom is. It could be in a university with high walls, and I'm coming from an academic perspective. But I'm sure, Swarnavel, you have that experience too, and you too, Kanak. You're also looking at education, and both of you are in education. And how can, for example, either activism or journalism, or in your case, filmmaking, documentary filmmaking, and in my case, the looking at craft as embodied knowledge and how it can enter into academia without being seen as something, oh, this is just manual work, or converting it into some kind of aesthetic only realm, and rather seeing it as a way of knowing. I don't know how you feel about that when you talk, when you teach, and when you make documentary films. And I think I have the same question to you after as well.
Yes, that's a very important question. The question of, for example, how to think, from bottom up, that is how to think about these kind of, local micro-level practitioners. This thought, always arises, even when I was making Migrations of Islam, which is about this large migration from the times of the Prophet to where Islam has migrated all over the world. You will find that it was, mainly through this kind of, very small little, artisans and individuals, rather than the top, way we normally think of, like madrasas and not. So that kind of moment will always be there, and that is the bulwark, I think, that is. For instance, that I agree with Kanak about the critique of, globalization, the times we are living, but we can also look at, those porousness. For instance, 2004 December, the day after December, tsunami struck, in Nagapattinam. So I read a newspaper article which said that students in Germany, they kind of collected their pocket money for the week because they wanted to send it to Nagapattinam people. This also becomes possible because of the global. Then that inspired me to do the entire documentary, So similarly, I would say that, ultimately these are these kind of, quotidian, very ordinary micro-level images that affect us more. Because for the bigger, discourse, you have the newspapers, you have the scholarly journals, But when it comes to making documentaries, I think these are the things that affect me personally.
I think maybe I could answer your question by referring to borders and aesthetics with reference to architecture, if I might. I mean, I don't know if I will be responding to the question as you meant it, but I think for all the rigid borders that exist in South Asia, within countries there are borders for sure, agreed. Also between countries, but bad architecture doesn't seem to be blocked by harsh borders. And I have seen this throughout. As in the last month and a half, I've actually traveled to Thimphu, Islamabad, Biratnagar, and now in Chennai. And most places, except for Thimphu, and I'll talk about Thimphu in a bit, that's in Bhutan. But otherwise, you wouldn't know that you were in Karachi or the outskirts of Chennai or Kathmandu. Concrete has taken over. And so what I find is that the quality of individual lives across this subcontinent of 2 billion people has been brought down drastically for many reasons. One of them is poor aesthetics of sheer poor aesthetics of the built environment around. And I don't know who's going to mark that on a psychological scale or even a psychiatric scale to say how much we're harming ourselves by not just the internal climate of a concrete building in a hot area or in a cold area or a mountain area or a plain area. And now that we're going into 50-degree temperatures in midsummer in the Indo-Gangetic plain, besides the physical distress, what about the aesthetic distress? I don't think it has been marked enough. And so where I would end this point would be by saying we seem to be going so far away from local idioms and local architecture. It's a oneness across South Asia, regardless of border, the rigidities of the border. And so what can be done to take us back to the local? Because in every way, including for peace of mind at individual community levels, the way to go is to try to work with some kind of local continuity with modern materials. But that's not happening. Now, I promised to say something about Thimphu. I should. So from afar, and I was there exactly a week ago. From afar, it looks brilliantly different from all other cities of South Asia because two things are promoted. One is a particular kind of Bhutanese traditional roofing and wood in the exterior, actual wood and not imported wood from or make-believe wood. So I thought, looking from afar, wow, this is brilliant. But you go close by and you realize that most people are actually doing these elements perfunctory. The rest of the architecture, the new architecture in Thimphu, is exactly architecture like everywhere else. But as required by the king and government, you put a long-eaved roof. So I realized that the actual lived experience within those houses, the modern houses of Thimphu, which looks otherwise so different aesthetically, are not much different.
We have not much time left, but I would like to, ask one question since I'm interested also in education, and I think both you and SWARNAVEL, both of you are as well. How does, in your work, SWARNAVEL, as a filmmaker, and you're narrating a story, where does language come in that? And language, by language I mean the discourse that you use, not just the language in English or Tamil, but the tone and the discourse, the words, the choice of words and what you really want to say. How do you sort of use that? What is your this thing? And the same for you, Kanak. I think you understand when you say that, what is the role of language, but not just Nepali, because you you have an archive which of the Nepali language, but also in journalism, but also in the future course that you plan to build. How does language play itself in education? And from my side, I feel I just have a word to say about it, is that for me, I think the embodied aspect of language needs to be brought into higher education, which is something we are right now so textbook oriented, so pedagogically stuck within a classroom that it's as though learning does not take place outdoors of classroom. So that's my view, and the discourse that comes along with it is basically textbook discourse which does not allow you to experience. So that's my point of view, but I will take you to,
Yes, I agree broadly with what you say. But, as a filmmaker, as a documentarian, you know that, what is singularly important about any film you make, whether fiction or non-fiction, it is the voice of the filmmaker. And that he cannot escape, because even in, like what we had, the direct cinema movement, where there used to be like the fly on the wall to probe into reality in the 60s, 70s. Even there, even the films of the great Frederick Weissman, you can see that, editing is involved, choice is involved, so the voice of the filmmaker is always there. And that is what makes it, a work of art, because then even if, some of the documentaries, like the very recent one called Flow, for the Love of Water, I'm talking about it because it was made by a filmmaker from Michigan, Irina Salina. So she used, the possibilities of the digital and the global. She had, people all over the world with small digital cameras working on the topic of water, the significance of water. Then she put together, sitting in Michigan, this wonderful film, with also collaborations with academicians, with experts like Blake and Barlow, activists. It's a very wonderful documentary. Even there you can find, that Irina's voice is always there, in such a project. So I think that's what, theory can gain from practice. That the ethical responsibility, even if it is a collaborative work, you put your name because, you are ultimately saying that, I am ethically responsible for this work, even prior to, owning it creatively.
So the voice of the narrator,
see, voice of the narrator is just, one part of the voice of the document. Narration or voice of God, or, you might have, like Michael Moore, you may be present all the time interviewing, or you may be absent totally, like Errol Morris. That is one aspect of it. But the whole thing, how you edit, what do you foreground, whose voice you give prominence, even if apparently you seem to create a space for all voices, but yet, your vision kind of guides the audience how to look at this film. Isn't it? That is the voice of the filmmaker.
So then you're saying that, if I'm not wrong, you're saying that the language of the film is beyond words as well, right? Because it's the images,
because it's a sum total of all these things. It's not just the sound, but also the visual, but also things in between. Isn't it? I mean, you have a dissolve, you have a fade out, a moment of contemplation. So all these things together, people have struggled to find equivalence, between language and cinema from the iconic Christian Metz onwards, But yet, cinema kind of escapes, it's kind of,
I think trying to link aesthetics with language, Arrti, the idea is to go to the idea is to go bottom up, and language should, and any use of language through film or poetry or whatever, should go to the masses, but not as one, but localized everywhere. So when you, in North India, when Hindi takes over, and Maithili and Bhojpuri and Hindavi and Braj lose out, there's a massive loss going on. And that also connects with aesthetics, because a mass aesthetics is being proposed, and it'll give people solace, but at the superficial level. It'll never give people the historical solace that they took historically from these things. So I think what I said about architecture applies to language as well. Like in architecture or in other areas, crafts, aesthetic crafts right now are increasingly now localized into boutiques in capital cities. If you go to Dhaka or Kathmandu or Delhi or Islamabad, the crafts now is not produced for the originally, historically intended communities, but they are in the boutiques for the well-to-do and the diplomatic community, if you will, if you're talking about Islamabad or Kathmandu. And that's the way of economy. I don't grudge those crafts people, because they at least, or the traders, because at least they have a small market and they're nurturing a craft alive. But certainly it's not from where it originated. So if there is aesthetics in craft, then that should be enjoyed by the people who originally originated it. And I know there's no one answer to this, and I'm happy. For example, in Nepal, woodcraft, wood carving was saved by the tourism industry. Thank God for the tourism industry. Yet that wood carving is now hardly appreciated and enjoyed day to day by the very people, the Newars of Kathmandu Valley, who originated it. So then to your point on education and language, I believe one of the biggest losses is when we departed from, when not just English, but the majoritarian languages of South Asia took over the local languages. Yesterday, as I departed Kathmandu, I came from an event. There's a language called Kusunda, Kusunda. And the only sole surviving lady, a 52-year-old lady named Kamala Sen Khatri, was the only sole surviving fluent speaker of the Kusunda language. Now that is something that is happening all over. So many languages have disappeared, and there is one lone survivor now in Nepal for that language that was from the Dang Valley of Nepal. So that is the reality. On the other hand, the reality that I think we must create while we speak in English, while we speak in Hindi or Nepali or any other language, is the power of, and I use the word vernacular, apologies to those who feel that that term should not be used, but we must try to revive the vernacular wherever, including in education. Besides the classical languages, Tibetan, let's say if we're talking about Nepal, you're talking about Tibetan, Sanskrit, Maithili, Newari, and probably Limbu. These are the classical languages, but there are 100 others in Nepal. Likewise, all over South Asia, there would be many more. Is it a lost cause? Should we continue to speak in English and Nepali and Hindi? I think there, and now let me anchor it to south of India where we are, which is also south of South Asia, is that I believe that at the very least, while there may be dialects that are dying in this part of South Asia as well, in terms of the power of the vernacular, at least when you talk about Malayali or Tamil or other Telugu, there is a distinction that there is still power even in media of these languages that is lost in the northern half of the subcontinent. So there's something going right in this part of South Asia that the other parts of South Asia should learn.
We stop here. We've been asked to stop, but is there any questions?
The question is for Kanak, and it's a very practical question regarding both aesthetics and borders. For any artist who might need to leave this country, is it possible for them to cross the Nepal border without a visa or any official eye on them?
In a positive sense, loaded question, and I will of course reply. You're saying, is there any restriction for an artist from a citizen of India, who happens to be a citizen of India, to move into? This issue has come up several times in the last few years, given the closure that is overtaking the country we know as India, the country we have loved as India, the country that has been the exemplar for the rest of South Asia, in terms of openness, open society, fundamental freedoms, and etc. And I will not speak for all of India, but definitely north of India is seeing a massive constriction. So then, to answer your question, at this point, the good news about Nepal, and sorry if this goes way out of topic, but the good news out of Nepal for now, I'm not saying this will last, but for now, it is the most open society of South Asia. It is also the most unregulated society of South Asia. And hence, when you cross the border, there may be some CCTV cameras south of the border, but no CCTV cameras north of the border. So yes, Nepal is absolutely open for Indian citizens because the border is open historically, not mandated by a departing colonial power, but the Nepal-India border is open, and hence any artist that wishes to travel or to flee is free to do so.
And can Indian authorities take action against them in Nepal?
They have done it. This is not really an inquisition, so I'll answer. When they are actual criminals, or if people come in without the knowledge of their colleagues, let's say, then it will be easy for Indian authorities to go in and grab someone. Vice versa is also true, but doesn't happen often. But Indian functionaries reaching into Nepal and grabbing people does happen. But if it is known that you are no, otherwise too. No, it doesn't happen. But under the radar, there can be collusion between the two police forces.
Thank you.
When we have coffee, you can tell me why you are asking me all these questions.
I don't think you need to know.
I think the topic is one of the most provocative topics, especially internationally now, from the US policies especially, and all the things that we faced in South Asia during the lockdown, the whole idea of migration and, the borders, even within the same country, but the borders. I'm just reflecting probably. One is an example of Hum Dekhenge, the song that really became the national anthem of anti-CAA struggles, not just in India. Of course, in Pakistan, it was already a protest and resistance song. In India, we had as many languages as possible. And I was fortunate enough to translate it into Tamil with my daughter, which traveled to Sri Lanka when they had the Gotha Go. And not just within Sri Lanka, but also the diasporic Sri Lankan Tamils. So I'm just thinking, instances like that really tell you that the aesthetics can take over these borders that are dividing. Now, having said that, I'm also kind of aware. I'm thinking of various collaborations, especially in films that are happening. And more so if it is happening, for want of another word, first world and third world context. And they are going places. There are a lot of awards and everything that are coming. But somehow I feel just like Slumdog Millionaire. There is a romanticization of the borders that are happening. even though the film is aesthetically very good. So I really want to know your take on how this aesthetics is turning into a commodity and the collaboration is really not on equal footing. Thank you.
Yes, Mangai, that's a very important question. There is also the other thing, like over the last decade, if you see, there is a lot of funding for global South collaborations. For instance, that if you look at Turkey and migrations to Germany, many important films have been made, over the last decade. So there are, important filmmakers, that earlier it was like France was like the Mecca, to get this money for African filmmakers, to be in France because of their colonial legacy and then make films, like people like Kiarostami also depended on this, Eurocentric, visibility. But today that scenario is also changing. I'm not saying that, that has been dismantled, but you can also see alternative scenarios, where a lot of collaborations, between global South filmmakers, it's happening, at this moment.
Okay, I think we're done, but I'll make one last attempt to answer respond to your comment. I think you would have hoped that the reach of Bombay cinema, Bollywood, would have let you move towards peace in South Asia, because peace in South Asia is predicated upon peace vis-a-vis India and Pakistan, but it's not happening. And you also would have hoped that internet would allow Pakistanis and Indians to speak, and Bangladeshis and Sri Lankans and Nepalis to speak across borders, because the borders don't mean anything because you're going online. That's also not happening. So whatever the nation states have done to us is much more deeper than the possibilities of all these new technologies to take over. So I feel that something more has to be done. My answer, and I'll rest my case right there, is just to go more local, because Bollywood has not worked. Yes.
It was totally India-Pakistani love fest, and very positive and unusual for the time it came.
Well, I can tell you.
It was a massive popular.
Yes, and Kabir Khan was at the Film South Asia Festival we just ran in Kathmandu, and I can tell you that one film against the tide is one. And let me just put a plug for Nepal, and now then of course, I'm not even looking towards Anita right now. 2 months ago, I had 2 individuals staying in my house, and I did a program with them, and that video will be up on YouTube in a couple of weeks. It's Parvez Hoodboy, and some of you who don't know the names will have to look it up. Parvez Hoodboy and Harsha Mandar under one roof in my house, and then doing a program in Kathmandu. That is the kind of space we want for all of South Asia.